All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Tracy Fitzpatrick, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us here at Netcom Learning, a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solutions. We're very excited to host today's webinar, The Ultimate Key to Project Manager Success, PMBOK Guide. And presenting today's topic is Greta Blash. Greta is a highly accomplished and experienced senior leader with project management and business analysis consulting and management experience for world-class organizations. She possesses exceptional business and technical proficiency and astute understanding of business operations. Now, please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic. We offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored towards your specific requirements. If you are interested in a further discussion, you can make an appointment with our learning consultants through our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded, so you will get free access to the recording in the next 24 hours via email. In addition, Netcom Learning helps customers build innovative learning organizations by achieving a smarter workforce, adapting to change, and driving growth. We do this with a broad catalog of offerings, developing customized learning plans, and our global delivery capabilities. Since 1998, we have been empowering organizations with our managed learning services to help them reach optimal performance results and address challenges. We do have 9 practice areas in which we specialize. They encompass people, process, and technology training. Today's presentation is from the business process practice area. Netcom Learning does offer a comprehensive training portfolio for business process training. And here's our upcoming class on our public schedule, which you can see project management professional class scheduled on February 26th. And we can also deliver private training to teams of which the learning plan can be customized to the specific needs of that audience. These offerings can be found with a simple search on our website at netcomlearning.com. So why should you attend this webinar? Project management is an emerging profession. Project management body of knowledge describes the sum of knowledge within the profession of project management. It collects set processes, best practices, terminologies, and guidelines that are accepted as standards within the project management industry. This webinar will help project professionals understand the fundamental practices needed to achieve organizational results and excellence in the practice of project management. Now, I'd like to give you a quick overview of the logistics before we get started. To begin with, you do have the option to adjust the window size to your liking. Simply hit the Escape key and find the Zoom button on the top left corner of your GoToWebinar viewer. Everyone has been muted except for our presenters. Please feel free to submit any questions you have for the presenters here in the questions pane, and we will address them at the end of the session. A PDF copy of today's slides are also in the handout section of your GoToWebinar viewer. And now I'd like to pass this over to Greta, who will be presenting today's topic. Greta, go ahead, you are live.
Good morning, everybody. It's an exciting day to be able to start to talk about the changes that are happening as far as project management, and especially some of the updates that are occurring and have been released as part of the new edition of the PMBOK Guide. Let's go back and talk about exactly, as Tracy kind of mentioned, what is the purpose of the PMBOK Guide itself? It's a subset that's recognized as good practice in the project management industry. It's developed by a whole bunch of people. If you actually look at the PMBOK Guide itself, you will see page after page of project managers who have been part of the review team. And I was fortunate enough to be able to be part of that latest review team for this new 6th edition. It's not a methodology, but instead it's built upon concepts that can be incorporated into how an organization actually wants to do their work, what kind of life cycle phases they might decide to have, what kind of policies, procedures impact their organization. It's basically now become a standard for project management. And has been recognized now as an ISO standard as well as an ANSI standard. So it's broadening its approach, it's broadening its audience as we move forward. So the history of this, it initially was distributed in 1996, even though there were a lot of pieces of this way back then, even before that time. At that point in time, we had 5 process groups: the initiating of a project, the planning, estimating, controlling, and closing. It had 9 knowledge areas, very similar to what we have today, and had 37 processes. Now, the PMBOK guide itself is revised about every 4 years, which seems like a long time, but because of the amount of reviews and all the work that goes into it, it basically takes 4 years to come up with a new revision. Now, obviously, some of us that work very closely with it realize that maybe not everything we want in each edition gets included, and so we anxiously wait for the next edition to see if finally those new ideas got incorporated. And in this latest release, most of us are very happy that a lot of the changes that we've requested have been incorporated. In the 3rd edition, they changed the controlling and estimating to monitoring controlling. So they made that change up in the process group itself. In the 4th edition, the 37 processes went to 42 processes. In the 5th edition, not only did the number of processes increase, but they also increased and added a new knowledge area, that being the stakeholder management area. Now, the 6th edition, which has just come out, has 49 processes now. But the big key to it has incorporated a lot of the other concepts that are going on and being utilized within the project management world, that of both agile as well as business analysis. The other big thing that also happened in this latest 6th edition is the terminology has really been standardized with all of the other project management standards that PMI has, so that we're all talking the same terminology, whether we're looking at risk management or schedule management or program management. All these various areas, we're all using the same terminology, and actually there's a lexicon they've put together that supports all of these standards now. So the 6th edition came out September 6th, and it had a lot of the same stuff in it, minor changes, except in the first 3 sections. Those are the areas which unfortunately a lot of project managers never bother to read or understand, but that's where most of these changes happened. Section 1, it talks a lot about project approaches, how you do different types of projects, because we know there is no one standard way of doing projects. And this is probably the area that is most important to be understood by every project manager. Think about the different ways that you're being asked to do a project. What is the purpose of it? What might you do? This is the area of the PMBOK guide that addresses that. Section 3 has to do with the role of the project manager. Now, one of the things that PMI has heard from all of the organizations, and especially very large organizations on a global basis, is that project managers are really good at the technical, putting together a scope and a schedule and a budget and monitoring, controlling those things. But sometimes their soft skills, their ability to work with other people, are not as strong as they might be. And so this whole section 3 ended up becoming more of what used to be just an appendix on interpersonal skills, and it's now been moved up to the front and has become a very important aspect for all project managers to consider. And I had a situation last week where I was working with some technology people, and they were saying, you know, if we could just get a seat at the table to be part of a project. And part of it has to do with the interpersonal skills that a project manager or any team member has to be able to work together as a team, to communicate in language and terminology that everybody understand. So even though project managers have their own terminologies, a lot of times we want to back off from that when we're talking to business people, because they don't understand it. Do they really need to use exactly those terms? We know what they mean. It gives us the guidance and a standardization on that, but we have to be careful when we're talking to other people about that. Now, a couple of other changes that happened. Even though we didn't add any new knowledge areas this time, we did change a few names. The first one, changing the time management to schedule management. It really is because this is a global standard. This standard reaches all over the world to project managers from every part of the globe. And as a result, we talk about schedules. We talk about the way that we work with schedules. We create them, we monitor those schedules. And so they changed that name from time management to schedule management. The other part is that the human resource management was really geared to how a project manager works with members of their team, more the people side of these resources. And even though we mention the fact there's other resources like equipment and supplies, etc., it didn't come across with that name. And so that's another minor little adjustment that was made to change it from human resource management to a more inclusive resource management. A couple of new processes that have been added, and we'll talk about these a little bit more, but managing project knowledge. This gets back into more of the knowledge management area, which is becoming more and more critical. I had a meeting yesterday with people that this is their big focus, is how do they capture all this knowledge that's out there, and then how do they access it when they need to use that knowledge to make decisions. The other part, they did put in an implementation to look at how the risk responses are being done. That was kind of a hole that we did, but we didn't really have a lot of guidance in that area. And then, of course, because we're talking about general resources rather than just people, we did end up having a control resource process now. We couldn't have a control people, right? But we can control the other resources that we have. They got rid of a process called closed procurement. And part of this was because the feeling was that in most cases, a project manager is not the one that's responsible for closing a contract. It is done someplace else by other people. They're obviously going to have to provide the status of how that procurement effort is going, but they're not really responsible for that closure. So they ended up eliminating that process. Another little minor change that happened was that we had a process where we estimated what kind of resources would be needed in order to put the schedule together. It was generally felt that that really should have been more part of the whole resource management knowledge area rather than part of scheduling. There's a lot of things that go into creating a schedule, not just understanding who the resources are, but what are the risks, what's the scope, what's the dependencies, what's the quality, etc. So that was a change that just kind of made it a little bit more specific to where that activity resource became part of a different process, different knowledge area. So let's go back and look a little bit more in detail at what is now in this first section. So Chapter 1, Introduction, there's some of the stuff that's the same as it was before, like what's the relationship between a project and a program and portfolio management, and then differentiating that from operations, talking about the importance of it. The development life cycles, this is where we start to see the major implementation of talking about Agile. And so what's happened is, rather than using the term Agile, because that really in many people's mind just goes to one approach, meaning Scrum. Agile is a whole umbrella of different types of approaches. And so PMI chose to use the word adaptive. So they look at predictive as the way, pretty much the life cycle waterfall that we're used to doing. We talk about iterative, incremental, which were there before, and now they end up putting in this adaptive life cycle. And then they talk about a hybrid. And actually, in reality, almost every project is going to end up being closer to a hybrid, because some parts may be predictive, some parts may be iterative, some parts may be adaptive. It depends on which approach is going to best serve the need for the project manager. But in this area, they do explain a lot of the things to consider to make those decisions. So once again, it's supporting the information that a project needs, a project manager needs, to be able to determine what's the best way to do this. The other part that they've done is they've talked a lot about tailoring and being able to say there's not a single way to do things. And rather than trying to say, here is the methodology of how you do project management, and the chart that everybody tends to refer to, which is now on page 25, those are things to think about. Those are ideas, activities, processes that you need to consider. But there is nothing that says that you have to do every one. It doesn't say which ones you must do. That's part of an organization that makes those decisions as part of their methodology. But this starts to talk about how you might be able to tailor and use these various concepts. The other thing is that there's been more of an emphasis now on a project and how it's strategically aligned with the business, why the project's being done, what are the different types of things. And this gets back into a lot of the business analysis area, because they're starting to more understand there's a need to have somebody that represents the business, understands it, understands their concerns, make sure that what we do within the project meets their expectations. And so there's some new business documents that are now showing as being brought in. They don't always have to be there, but it's something to really consider. You know, a business case. I realize a lot of times we don't get a business case to justify why this project was done. But maybe we ought to at least go back and ask the question, why? What was the expectation? And what was the justification for spending the money for this project? That's basically what a business case does. The benefits management plan, once again, goes back to the idea of, why are we doing this? What kind of benefits are expected to come as a result of this? This also ties our projects more closely aligned to the benefit portion that we talk about if we're in a program where we have multiple projects, because projects tend to create a single result, whereas a program provides the benefit of being able to combine those individual results and be able to provide the benefit and the realization back to the organization. Still have the project charter and the project management plan included in here, but we also start talking about how are we going to measure the success for this project? What is the acceptance criteria, and how do we know that we've actually achieved what was expected for us to do? So the second chapter just kind of takes the stuff that was there before, but it brings it up to a higher level. We always talk about enterprise environmental factors, more commonly known as EEFs, and organizational process assets, which are OPAs. And you'll see those as being inputs to many, many processes. These are areas that, once again, an organization has in place either because of the industry they're in or the actual project and the organization, things that are going to impact the project. Sometimes they are constraints, sometimes they are additional information that can be used. Your EEFs can either come from internal the organization or external. They're organization. They're things that are there because of the business that you're in, the area, the location, the geography, things like that, that are going to impact the project. Your OPAs, if we focus on the word assets, these are things that the organization provides to us, whether they're templates or procedures or policy, or now this whole idea of having this knowledge repository or places where previous information on other projects, efforts, things that have happened, where we have that ability to understand the past and use that as an input to help us understand how we may be able to work through this project, where the pitfalls may be, where are some of the positives that we could have. We also talk a lot about organizational systems. And this is an area where especially the structure of the organization, we have found over the years has a pretty large impact on how we actually are able to do projects. So they've added a few more here. It used to we just had functional, matrix, project-oriented. Now they're calling out additional ones. If we have a functional organization, meaning, you know, we're working within sales, or we're working within accounting, or we're working within HR, but what if we have multi-divisions? How does that impact the project itself? Are we working only within one division, even though there are multiple, or are we trying to work within all of those divisions as we're doing this project? Also, we start talking about the idea of what is the impact on a virtual organization or virtual teams, the whole challenges that come about because of the virtual nature that most of us are working in right now. On top of the fact that it's both the organization as well as as a project manager, when we get down into the actual team members, the challenges, but a lot of the benefits of being able to work in that virtual environment. As I said, the Chapter 3 really took the idea of what is the real role of a project manager and moved it just from an appendix back up into the front. Talked about who a project manager is, what their sphere of industry is, or influence is across a lot of different areas. What are some of the competencies that a project manager should have? The technical, the strategic, business management, the leadership. Those are part of what PMI has come up with as far as this talent triangle. And so once you get a PMI certification, you have to maintain certain amount of hours of training, and they are now being separated into these areas so that not only do you keep yourself up to date on technical aspects, but you need to understand the strategic and the business alignment and that whole area, as well as just leadership. And leadership, once again, are those soft skills, conflict, negotiation, things that you have to be able to understand to become a much better project manager. And that leads us into that next bullet, which has to do with leadership versus management. We all know that as the demographics change, and especially we have new people joining and we have different age groups and backgrounds, we start to realize that our management has to be able to adapt a lot. And instead of being managers, we become leaders. And I heard somebody say, you manage from the outside, you lead from the inside. So you end up being able to motivate people to work with them, servant leadership, adaptive leadership, situational leadership. There's all sorts of additional theories out here that project managers need to be aware of as they're trying to be able to motivate and make sure that these projects achieve what they're supposed to. And then, of course, being able to integrate what they're doing with all these other areas. So part 2 has now become the ANSI standard for project management. It has a lot of the same information in it that the rest of the PMBOK does. It will be eventually, and in some cases already has been, moved out and become a standard document in itself. So it goes through a lot of the same information, but it is meant to be a standalone standard now. And like I said, it's an ANSI standard that has been approved and is now out there for project management. Now, one of the big changes here, which we had hoped had been in the 5th edition, didn't really get there, but it's now fully into the 6th edition, is the whole incorporation of agile or adaptive methods. And there's an entire appendix that talks about how you end up utilizing these particular principles, mindsets, tools, and techniques on any project. Whether you actually are doing an adaptive approach to a project or you're just using the mindset, it's a huge change, and we're seeing it coming about more and more as we go through. Each knowledge area, as we go through them, is going to have an actual section calling out how you consider what you're going to do in this knowledge area using more of an adaptive approach. Now, I have a picture up there of the new practice guide. This actually came out at exactly the same time as the new 6th edition and was bundled as a package if you were to have ordered the new printed edition of the 6th edition of the PMBOK guide. You would have also had the Agile practice guide to go with it. I highly, highly recommend that you look at that you understand. Once again, it's concepts. It's not specific methods. It's tools and techniques, mindset, principles that can be applied to any project. Okay, now let's get down to specific changes here, because there were some name changes that were done for each of these processes. Remember, we have a number of processes. They tend to change their name just a little bit. This process called Perform Quality Assurance. It was pretty confusing as to, is this mean you have to have a quality assurance person on the team and that's what they do, or is the project manager doing it? And really what it was saying is, you need to manage the quality. You need to understand, are we doing what we said we were going to do as far as the quality plan? And do we need to make some modifications? As I said, the plan human resource management turned into just plan resource management. Rather than acquiring the project team, we acquire resources in general. But we do develop the team, we manage the team. So the whole concept of the team has increased beyond just the core project team into all of the other people that have to be part. Sometimes those, we consider them stakeholders, sometimes we consider them extended team members. The control of communications and control of risk, we can't really control those areas, but we can monitor them. So they've backed off on the control on a number of processes under monitoring controlling to talk about monitoring rather than trying to actually control that. And the same thing when we start talking about controlling stakeholder engagement. We monitor it and we talk about, rather than stakeholder management, because we don't manage stakeholders, we're more concerned with how we engage those stakeholders. When we look at each one of those knowledge areas, the 10, each one has key concepts, talks about trends and emerging practices in that area, and then it talks about how you might be able to tailor that particular area that you're working on. These are, once again, a lot of times project managers don't read these sections because it's like, okay, so I just need to know, how do I put together a plan, or how do I put together a schedule? This is the background. This is where the PMBOK really is going to help a project manager understand a lot of various options they can utilize to become more successful on their project. So in your processes themselves, one of the best things that I really personally like is that now they have talked about processes as being very different. There are certain processes that are only done once, or at very predefined points in a project. There's other processes that are done as needed. Whenever a need arises, that process may kick in. The third type is those processes that are done continually throughout the project. What happens is we look at that page 25 or the old 61, whichever version you're looking at, and we see a bunch of processes, and they look, because they're in a column, that you tend to want to go down, do one by one by one by one. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. They are all just there. They've been put into categories to help us better understand what the purpose of that process is, what it's associated with as far as a knowledge area, and usually what association it has with, am I in a planning stage for the project or replanning? Am I executing, where I'm actually doing things, or whether I'm monitoring, controlling the work of the project? So those processes are put into those little cells within that chart, but that doesn't mean that we have to go through them in a sequential manner. And this is where we start to identify more specifically how each one of those is going to be done. Now, the tools and techniques are probably where the biggest change came. They're looking more at tools and techniques, grouping them by the purpose that you would use them. So once again, the PMBOK guide never specifically says this is the tool you have to use. It is definitely not vendor specific, so they stay away from anything like that. And so now they've even gone more general into saying these are tools you either use to gather information or data, analyze it, help make decisions, being able to communicate to other people, and then what kind of tools and techniques would you use for these interpersonal team skills? And they're listed and identified by the group back in the Appendix X6, and they also refer to where those different tools and techniques, which processes they're actually used in. The other area that has changed is that a couple of the documents, major documents, like the project management plan, rather than looking at all the component parts, because it's really made up of 13 subsidiary plans, when we see it more generally, which means now the project manager has to do a little bit of thinking. Okay, so which portions of the project management plan might I want to use? So the individual components of that project plan are listed as they are created, especially those subsidiary plans. But the input is not shown on the chart as a specific input, but it is explained when you get into the textual description of kind of the ideas that you need to think about. Now, some of the other project documents, once again, they've been lumped together. Individual documents are shown as they're created, but a lot of times what you just see is overall project documents now coming in as an input to an actual process. One of the big areas that changed, and I think personally this came from the ability that the Agile world has had to really improve how things are being done, especially in the area of continuous improvement. And that has to do with the lessons learned. So they've actually put in a brand new process called Manage Project Knowledge. The output of that is a lessons learned register. And it now becomes an input to many, many, many processes. And it's updated as part of the monitoring and controlling and executing processes. Now, one of the other things is this has been put into the executing process group rather than part of closing, because the idea, especially from Agile, when you start doing retrospectives or whatever the other methods call it, you're periodically taking a look at what worked, what didn't work, and you're making minor adjustments where needed to be able to do that. And as a result, you're being able to take something and see if it actually worked. if you do lessons learned at the end of a project and you say, well, I probably should have done such and such, I don't know whether it would have worked or not. All I'm doing is saying it might have. So it doesn't really provide as much value going forward as if I'm periodically saying, you know, we really need to try to change something here. Let's see if we do this and if it makes any difference. And then we recheck it again in a little bit, say, did that improvement work? And if so, great. If it worked partially, so maybe tweak it a little bit more. But the whole idea here is that you're doing continual process improvement by being able to look at what worked, what didn't work, and make some adjustments here. At the end, this gets transferred into becoming a complete asset as part of the OPAs and now becomes part of a lessons learned repository. So for each one of those knowledge areas, there is additional front material now. Talks about the key concepts that have to do with scope or schedule or time or quality. What are some of the trends and emerging practices? How would you tailor them? And then how would you consider making some differences depending on if you are in an agile or adaptive environment? So let's quickly go through each of these. Just you can look at this more later on if you're interested. There's a new process in integration management. We'll go by knowledge areas right now. A couple of new inputs, pretty much more because of the fact that we're looking at more emphasis on aligning with the business. You'll notice these tools become a little bit more general now. And we have some new outputs. That lessons learned register. We have an assumption log that now is a new type of an output. We look at the scope. We're bringing in business documents, data analysis gathering, interpersonal. Really the only change there is the business documents becoming more of a general area of information we need to know from the business as far as what the scope of the project's going to be. In the project schedule area, as I said, we moved the estimate resources down to resource management. Most of the tools are pretty much the same except for the idea of the release planning that is done as part of Agile. So I don't want to go into that now, but this is a huge thing as you're starting to look at scheduling a little different, and especially if I'm working in either an iterative, an incremental, or an adaptive type of an environment. I need to be able to understand a little bit more about the planning that I would do for each of those releases. Cost management, a couple of new tools, and once again, business documents, especially where I would have some sort of constraint or some area that's going to impact my cost and my estimating of what the cost of this project is going to be. Quality management has changed a lot, especially in the area of the tools. So those are a little bit more specific. This area changed a lot in the 5th edition and just basically provided a bunch of tools for us, but it didn't necessarily talk about the purpose of these tools. So problem-solving tools rather than just having the basic 7 quality tools we had before. The resource management, as I said, the name changed, and we moved one of those processes down, and we added this control resource now. So we always laughingly said, what is the one area that did not have a monitoring control process? And it was HR management. Now that's been filled in. So there is a process in monitoring controlling that has to do with the a lot more tools and techniques, once again, to identify this whole idea of co-location, virtual teams, the trade-offs between the two of those, some of the problem solving. This gets back into a lot of your interpersonal soft skills that the project manager has to utilize when they're working with the project teams themselves. A new output being the team charter. Now, in Agile, we talk a lot about team rules and how we determine how we're going to work together. this is a case where this has now been added in as a new output of being able to have the team come up with a charter as to how they're going to work, what their guidelines are, things like that. Done by the team, monitored by the team, controlled by the team. Communication management, it had a name change, very subtle, but it used to say project communications, whereas communications is technology and communication is the actual communication between human beings. So once again, most of your tools and techniques is where these changes came. Just very slight re-emphasis of the fact that communication has to be between people. Risk management, we have a new process where we actually implement those risk responses, and we change the name of controlling the risk to monitoring the risk. Some new tools in there, especially some of the risk categories that you may not have come up against before. And then being able to talk about uncertainty and how you're going to put that together. A risk report being one of the new outputs there. Procurement, as we said, we got rid of the closed procurement, somebody else's problem. Bring the business documents in, a lot more tools and techniques, but really the area of the outputs, where they are specifically calling out things that we talked about a lot of times, but we didn't call them out as documents. The strategy of how we're going to do contracting and procurement, the bid documents themselves, the independent cost estimates, because most of the time we really don't know what something's going to cost as a project manager unless we've done it over and over again. But if we're in a new area, sometimes having somebody who has that information, who's done it before, may not have the size and the complexity of the organization to be able to do the work, but they do know what it's going to take to do that. And that's what your independent cost estimates are. And then, of course, any sort of documentation on the procurement that has to be updated. Once again, procurements are legal documents, so they have to be managed very closely. Stakeholder management was the area that we moved into new in the 5th edition. We changed a couple of names because, once again, we don't manage stakeholders. We just talk about their engagement. We don't control, we monitor that. Once again, some of those new tools that went into that area. This is just a little softening of the terminology, especially from the standpoint of management of stakeholders to engagement of those stakeholders. So the two exams, the PMP and the ACP exams, will change beginning March 26th. That means up until that date, both the PMP and the ACP will be, the exams will be as they are today. The PMP especially then becomes a matter, it will reflect what's in the 5th edition of the PMBOK guide. After March 26th, all of these areas that I've just gone through will now be part of the exam because the exam will then be based on this 6th edition. The CAPM exam will change as of the end of May. It's taking a little bit longer to do it. Their PMI does have some kind of encouragement for people to take it ahead of time, in the fact that they're offering some pretty good discounts right now if you are willing to take it as a pilot before the end of May date. So if somebody is interested in possibly doing the CAPM, realize that if you could take it as a pilot using the 6th edition and get a fairly substantial discount on the cost of the exam. So the big question is, should you push to complete if you're going to plan on taking these exams before these dates, or should you wait and take them afterwards based on the new information? So just a reminder, PMI members can download electronic versions of all the foundational standards. And there's actually 47 that are available for you to download in electronic version free of charge as long as you're a PMI member. You can get both the PMBOK guide, the 5th edition and the 6th edition. So you could get both of those and you can do your own comparison about what they are. I also was very fortunate to be part of a team of global project managers and experts who we spent a lot of time prior to the 6th edition coming out in September going through and identifying all these new changes. Obviously, the stuff that we had seen in draft form prior to September 6th, there were changes and we expected that. So we worked really hard. We put together a book that's an ebook that's available for free download with much more extensive information about these changes based on this 6th edition. It's like, I think it's like 133 pages worth of information. So if you think I had a lot in these slides, check the book out because it has even more. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tracy to see if you have any other questions that we could go through.
Thank you so much, Greta. That was very informative, and we do want to remind our attendees that Netcom Learning offers a comprehensive portfolio for business process training options, and below is the course for PMP training, so take advantage of that. And team training can be customized and accelerated to meet your organization's specific needs. You can contact us today to be connected to one of our learning consultants to help advise you on your specific needs, or email us at webinar@netcomlearning.com, or simply search our catalog at netcomlearning.com. So we all know technical skills are necessary to empower our careers, but do you need to improve or upgrade your leadership skills as well in order to accelerate your career? Along with your technical abilities, develop the skills you need to manage yourself, others, and business better. Welcome to Starter Learning, a collaborative knowledge platform bringing the world's best business and leadership insights from Fortune 1000 leaders, best-selling authors, and Ivy League professors. Further, if you are interested in learning from the top American leaders, please log on to the e-learning platform, starterlearning.com, and you can avail the special promotion meant for first-time users. Simply use coupon code STARTER10 and begin your leadership journey now. And right now we are going to launch a quick poll to find out how many people might be interested in taking some additional training. So please take a few moments to fill that out before you all log off. In addition, we do have a lot more informative webinars coming up, so please go to netcomlearning.com in order to register. Don't forget to follow and like our social media pages to get the latest technology updates. You can refer to our GoToWebinar chat window for the links. And now let's get to some of those questions. Greta, first question is, why should I take the exam now versus waiting for changes?
Well, I think a lot depends on whether you have actually had a chance to review and study the 5th edition of the PMBOK guide. If you've been working and within that environment, I would say go ahead and get the exam completed before it changes over. If you haven't really spent the time studying and preparing, then I probably would wait. Now, for those of you, if somebody actually is going to try to take it under the 5th edition, I mean, we only have till March 26th. And I think you're going to be surprised as how fast the seats in the testing sites actually are filling up. So if you are considering doing it, you need to get your application in, get it approved, and then schedule a test time to be able to actually sit for the exam. Now, remember though, the one thing is on the PMP, you do have to have the training, whereas with the ACP and the CAPM, you can have those training hours as long as you get them completed before you take the exam. So depends on what you want to do, but I would say if you've been working and studying and having thought about doing it, just get it done.
Okay, next question. I am currently studying to sit for the CAPM exam using the 6th edition. If I plan to take my exam in April, the 6th edition is the correct resource. Is that right?
Yes, and there will be if you take it in April, there will be a rebate that you'll get afterwards, after the May date, because you will be considered part of the pilot on that. So if you're taking it in April, that's a good case. But yes, it will be it'll be under the 6th edition. So just make sure that you see all of those changes because the CAPM is totally based on the PMBOK guide. So all of those inputs and outputs, tools and techniques, you'll have to understand off the 6th edition.
Okay, next question. Do we get additional sessions for the critical path, etc.?
I'm not sure what you mean by additional sessions. That the whole critical path network diagramming, that is one of those tools and techniques that is expected to be able to be understood. There are, I mean, it's usually, it is included in all the training. So that might be an option that, you know, we do a webinar just on that if there's enough interest, Tracy.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Greta, for that very informative session, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. And if you do come up with any additional questions, feel free to send them to webinar@netconlearning.com at any time. We hope that you found today's webinar informative, and we look forward to seeing you back here with us soon. Feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about our webinars and other courses. Have a great day, everyone.